And welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael Koff, and today we are actually going to have this episode being pre-recorded in full disclosure, as my guest is in Australia, and with the time frame, I could not ask them to sacrifice a morning. So, out of the kindness, we are pre recording this. So, those of you in the chat room, when this is live, I hope you will take that into consideration and won't feel like we're neglecting you in any way. But with that housekeeping out of the way, I am happy and excited to introduce our guest, George Mitrovic.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Rearing and ripping and roaring to go.
So, for those of you who haven't seen you in a podcast or read your many, many books, would you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Hello, girls and boys, ladies and gentlemen. My name is George Mitrovic. I live in Australia, which is a nightmare to do podcasts and interviews with because we always stuff the times up, but it always works out in the end. I've written a few books over the last few years. I think the last count is 128, and I'm not talking about 100 pages. I'm talking about average size 300 pages, 600 pages, up to 1,700 pages, and all in easy to read formats. My books aren't for academics. They're for people who want to have an understanding of the weird, the wonderful and mysterious. I've written more on Bigfoot than anyone else in recorded history. Just released a set of 1,800 pages, 5 volumes with maps. Amazing the discoveries you can get with maps. I've written hundreds and hundreds of pages on UFOs over the years, which are all published in lots of different books. And I just finished a 7,000-page, 22-volume encyclopedia on strange phenomena. And then I decided to write a small book on meteorite hits and misses. Then I wrote a book on giants in North America, just for a change. I write books in the middle of books. Just because I get bored writing big books, I write a little one. So you never know what subject you're going to find. They're all on Amazon. They're all ebooks. They are paperbacks as well, and some are hardbacks. I thought I'd put the plug in now because I prefer people buying from Amazon. Some people don't like it, but I get a bigger cut out of it. Not that you make any money out of books. I spend more on books than I make on selling books. That's about it at the moment. Let's get right into the meaty bit.
So I have to say, you brought up a topic that I have been really wanting to talk to someone about engaging, and so I'm glad you mentioned it, and that's the giants in North America.
Yes, well, we're not talking about fee-fi-fo-fum giants. They're not 80 feet tall. Physiologically, the human skeletal structure can't do that. All animals are limited by the size of their organs and the size of their skeletal structure. But to the average 5'2" colonist, happily coming to North America with all their diseases, which quickly laid low most of the native population. But that's another story altogether. There were people with a height of 6.5 to 7 feet, some cases 7.5 to 8. The Adena people and the people who lived in the St. Lawrence River Valley several thousand years ago. They were 6.5 to 7 feet tall on average. Okay, these days we think, oh, that's not much. But we're not 5'2" anymore either. To a 5'2" person, that's a male height in the 17th, 18th century. That's a giant. And then the story grows and grows and grows. America's riddled with giant remains. Well, it was riddled with giant remains, I should say. I wrote a book on it. What was it? The Atlas of Strange Mysterious Archaeology of North America. It's state by state, county by county. You can get in your car and see what's in your neighborhood. You'll probably be surprised. My books are designed as travel guides in a lot of cases. They're either in chronological order order in geographical order. I think I've got Asperger's, I'm not sure, but I like organizing.
No, that's actually a brilliant way to do it because
It's easy.
anyone wanting to do a road trip, you
Can
pretty
do it.
much, yeah, you pretty much have done it for them. They can just go spot to spot.
Yeah, and that's the way they're designed. So you can go and see this strange archaeology and the see on maps, because a lot of my books have got maps in them. You see on maps that, yes, Serpent Mound is amazing, but you should see the other 20 sites within 20 kilometres of it, which you hadn't thought of. You might want to see, you might not know that Spruce Hill near Serpent Mound has remains of pre-Columbian iron ore manufacturing in America, which is not supposed to exist, but it sits there. And then you'll find, in my books, because I gather data like a big Hoover. A Hoover is an English vacuum cleaner. I don't know if the same phrase is used in North America.
It
And I
is
like to
actually.
see what is there, and you can only do that with maps. You suddenly realize you haven't got a pinpoint. You have got a whole wide horizon that you can travel in, and then you link the horizons together, and you're entering a strange world that you never realized existed. And in many cases, with the animals and cryptids and the rest of it, a world that still exists all around you that you may not be totally aware of.
So I'm curious, do you think the giants just naturally were here walking around, or do you think they're from like inner Earth and come up and every once in a while?
Well, I'm not a follower of inner Earth, heaven forbid, and don't start hissing at me now. I won't respond. I was
Oh
referring
no,
more to
it's
some of your
totally fine.
listeners. Giants are all related. Okay, some would say there might be the Elohim that are mentioned in some versions of the earliest parts of the Bible, the sons of God. And they weren't regarded as too big, or they wouldn't have been able to mate with the daughters of men. You've got a certain physiological problem there. If they're 40 foot tall, you can imagine the schlong on it. It's not going to mate with anything that's 5 foot or 4'10".
No.
And I'm not being crude, it's physiology. Always bring every explanation down to the simplest explanation. And if that doesn't work, then start working outwards. It's like Bigfoot. I love Bigfoot. I write tons of books on Bigfoot. People get really annoyed with me because I write so much on Bigfoot. And once again, there's the county, there's the address. Go see if you can find him. I remember getting interviewed a few years ago via Zoom in New York. And I said, you know what? It's something that's always puzzled me. And I think it's part of a North American coyness about things. There's some things you don't chat about, you don't write about, you don't put anywhere, which is weird. I'm Australian, so we're a little more direct, a lot more direct. Now, I said the most common storyline in Bigfoot reports I've found is that Randy and Andy, they've gone for a drive, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, they get out to relieve themselves, so to say. We know what they're doing, they're having a leak on the side of a road.
Right.
That's normal. Young fellas out driving, probably had a couple of beers, and they urinate on the side of the road. And he says, why would you bother bringing up that point? I said, because almost a vast majority of Bigfoot reports indicate that as soon as they started doing it, some big, hairy hominid or cryptid started screaming, yelling, throwing things, jumping around, and getting exceptionally pissed off. And this is not supernatural behavior. This is anthropology 101. This is standard monkey and ape behavior. And remember, we're related. No matter what we think, even if part of our ancestry comes from outer space, we're still a simian of some type, even though we call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens. We're the wise simian. The wise simian, I should say, not a synonym. So I said that explains the physical reality of a hairy hominid. It's a big, hairy hominid that's upset by somebody whittling on their territory. as every ape and gorilla and monkey does. That's how they mark their territory. You keep it, you reduce it to the simplest explanation. They also go a bit weird when people are courting in the woods as well, which is another wonderful euphemism. We know what they're doing, and it's not studying for their SATs. You do that at home with decent light and on your own. Once again, you go to the zoo and you look at monkeys, and if you see one or two doing the wild thing, usually two, you sometimes see one, you'll sit the rest watching. It's standard simian behavior. We have to gain this understanding of a very intelligent creature that lives, as far as we know, on all the inhabited continents of Earth. I'm not going to bring Antarctica into this. I don't know. There's no research done on Bigfoot in Antarctica, but I'd say with nothing to eat there, there's a good chance that he or she is not there. But in the rest of the inhabited world, they're everywhere. But they're wary of us. And the funny thing is, all of these Randys and Andys that are out driving in the woods at night, are out hunting, and they got their guns, and they've been hunting squirrels since they were knee high to a squirrel. They can shoot anything out of a tree. 99.99999% of all sightings where these hunters shoot at a Bigfoot, they don't hit it. Amazing. This thing's 8 to 9 foot tall. It's standing around. It's as wide as a barn door. You're 20 feet away with your gun, expert marksman and squirrel shooter, and you can't hit a Bigfoot. That's where we start getting a little strange with things. Are they an earth simian, or are some of them not earth simians? After all, we've got Native American traditions that state that Bigfoot and his like, the Wendigo, etc., come from not quite here. They aren't from Earth. And then you've got weird reports. Okay, when I do Bigfoot sightings, this is a sighting of a large, hairy hominid. I ignore the surroundings. I ignore the storyline. October 1954, France, during a huge wave of UFO sightings. A UFO comes down out of the sky. Plonk. The door opens. Somebody is descending. It's not 6'6" Orthon from Venus with the long blonde hair and the dazzling purple cloak. On 6 occasions, it's 4.5 foot tall and it's hairy, with big eyes. Okay, figure that one out. As far as I'm concerned, it's still a Bigfoot sighting. And these started occurring again with full-size Bigfoot creatures in the late 60s in Pennsylvania, around Uniontown. Shared hallucinations? Or what? But there's still a form of Bigfoot. 3 types, maybe. 3 types, maybe. See, I only stick to observations. Observations and the times and dates they're observed. How the human witness transfers that into their reality and then transfers that reality to us is the unique part. Am I rushing ahead, Michael?
No, actually, you're right in tune with where I am, because I was sitting there thinking as you were talking about the Bigfoots, going, so do you feel, I feel like they're interdimensional or alien species that comes here and visits. That's why we can't always find their home, or any, like, they're the best guests to visit the planet because they never leave a trace of them behind. They clean up after themselves. But as you were describing, I was like, man, you just answered that question.
I have a bad habit of doing that. And then when people think they've got the answer, I usually come along and destroy that answer. I've had that people write that about my books. That I give them a proposal and they find they actually agree with the proposal, and then I tell them why that proposal still needs to be worked on. It's all ongoing.
No,
Research is always ongoing.
it is, and I love how you go about your investigations, and how you discern what information is valid versus, yeah, you don't necessarily need that. And going back and like saying, sharing that, they were urinating, it's like, yeah, most people would leave that out because it's like, well, we don't need, but that's part of the story and that's
It's a huge
part of the
part.
experience. And so it's like we can't leave that out. And
We can't
because,
leave out any detail. Any detail. We can't start censoring our own reports and the people's reports. It is the report. Because the report itself is subject to interpretation by the witness. But the time and place isn't. The time
no,
and place are objective. The report, whether it's UFOs or Bigfoot or Virgin Marys in trees, why they like trees, I've got no idea. No, I said like caves, especially the blue Marian ones, the ones with the blue cloaks. Why they like trees and caves? Buggered if I know. But it's interesting once you start looking at patterns of occurrences and leave out the actual occurrence. You start getting a whole different world because you
I
only have
agree.
time and place.
And it's interesting you mentioned the cave with the Mother Mary sighting because what triggered in my head was, well, the resurrection of Jesus. He was in a cave, so to speak, and when they moved the boulder, he was gone and he was seen outside. And it makes me wonder if the cave is like a symbol of like a portal. And so they just appear and disappear, and that's why we're seeing them in caves is we're seeing them where they're entering our area or our vision field.
Your portals are like that. I've spent since probably 1970, well before you were born, working on portals. I've written a 1,700-page book on portals I published in 2012, which I started in 1972 in a chronological order, which is always challenging. So you get to any year and say, gee, that's what happened here. And that book was so complex it had latitudes and longitudes for every single sighting in it. It was actually designed for computer systems that didn't exist yet, where you could go through the book choosing patterns of what you wanted to look at. Patterns of latitude, longitude, month, time, place, type of phenomena, activity of a phenomena. Bloody hard book to collate. Because every time you entered a new addition to it, it took half an hour to update it because this is in the pre-computer age. You had to update every single same identifier in the entire book to that point, and then on again. It's enormous, but it was designed to look at patterns.
It is, and I like how you brought up looking at the patterns because when I was on Andy Decode's show, uh, one of the viewers asked me about the cryptid dog man because he's supposed to be prevalent in my area. And I had said, honestly, I had never heard of him. And I went in, deep dived the dog man, and found all this research and all this data. And when I finished and made a video of it, my determination was there's no set time, there's no set season, there's no set anything that I could say these are the conditions to guarantee you're going to see a dog man. And so, have you come across that in your research where the information is so random, like the sightings are daytime, nighttime, hot, cold? So there's like no, oh, they definitely don't like this, so don't go looking in this time frame.
Well, I will agree and disagree at the same time. Yes, they don't really give a rat's whether it's snowing, raining, or whatever's happening. They're not too concerned with the location. And remember, a lot of the witness observations are observations. They're subjective, as I said, with every type of phenomena, but they're not objective. Objectivity is time and place. In 1992, after 20 years of research on my maps and things, I was introduced to a Pasteur Prize-winning physicist in Australia, and I asked him a question. I said, I've got thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of data from 1800 to 1976, 77. And I said, I believe there's a pattern to it. I can't verify it. I'm not a mathematician. You've been recommended to me because you're one of the best mathematicians around, being a physicist. So what we did was I used to go to his house 2 or 3 nights a week. He was 30 miles away, down in Wollongong. I was in Highlands, then in Mossvale, on the east coast of Australia. And I entered data, all the latitudes and longitudes I'd collected, starting at 1800 to 1977. It took about 8 weeks, until 2 o'clock in the morning, basically, on the nights I went over. Thousands and thousands of times and places, but no mention of the actual phenomenon. I thought, if there's a pattern to this, it indicates something real. If there's no pattern, everything is hallucination, schizophrenia, misinterpretation. It's all random and imagination. But if a pattern appears, patterns don't appear randomly. It's a mathematical thing. A pattern cannot be random. Are you getting me here, Michael?
I am.
Okay. 1992, we did a lot of research. He did a lot of mathematical testing. He got the entire data flow from 1800 to 1977 and reversed it, so it flattened out, so you had a better idea. It was a reverse exponential projection. We don't need to go any further than that. And it started showing movements. That was interesting. Because before that, before I'd met him, where are we? I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yes.
It's a series of sine waves. The one here, I forget these things reverse, is North America. This is 1800 to 1977. This one along here is 1897. Incidentally, the period of the Great Airship Flap. And over this gap here, which is the Atlantic Ocean, we've got England and parts of Europe. But what's interesting about this, and this is why I had to get it tested, they're sine waves. And sine waves have one thing in common. They're repeatable. None of these phenomena were random, which creates a few problems. Because what we'd found, a 515-year cycle, a 90-year cycle, an 80-year cycle, and a 70-year cycle, roughly. That tallied with the periodicities of Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, and the 515-year one. As they call it today, Planet 9. I called it Persephone when we found it in 1992. Planet 9, a month ago, was apparently discovered by Japanese scientists and astronomers. Would you believe it? They found it at 515 astronomical units from the Earth.
Really?
which is the peak of this periodicity in there. So these phenomena on Earth here are reflected in sine waves. I know it's a bit much to do physics early in the morning. But, little things like, God, these are just simple little graphs. They're periodicities, all found from this stream of data. I mean, they're beautiful. All different lengths. And where's the big one? Aha. That's the 515-year one.
Wow. So,
Mathematics can prove anything.
right. So I'm curious, what drove you to see the sine waves and the patterns, and to know
That
to
that was me plotting stuff on a graph. I had lots and lots and lots of them, but I got the shits and burnt most of them. That one managed to escape because I was getting nowhere with them. It's all got patterning, the whole lot of it. The whole multiverse we have has got
right?
patterning.
It's just in my mind. I'm sitting here picturing, writing all the data and plotting everything. What triggered in your mind? Was it like just like saying? Was there like an inner voice saying there's something here,
Yes,
and you just were driven, or did you like
I,
just happen to glance down and go, "Wait a minute, I need to get
I,
this confirmed"?
I. What confused me very much so when I started reading books like the Yandi Letters and other books like that when I was 7. After I had already started reading books on archaeology when I was 4. I've got a remarkably high intellect. They reckon it could be 205. So I analyse and process data pretty quick. Mind you, I have no idea how to open a screen door, but that's normal for me. I was looking at lots of this stuff and reading lots of stuff on UFOs and monsters and Bigfoot and ancient weird archaeology and mysticism and you name it. And I thought, hang on, why is it we have a mountain here and at here, in this same locality, we have a group of people and they're happily sitting around singing Kumbaya or God knows what. And suddenly, down comes the UFO. Once again, the hatch comes down, but it's not a Bigfoot this time. It's Orthon from Venus. And his name appears rather commonly, like UMMO in contactee sightings. It's amazing what patterns you get when you do overviews on a mega scale. And he comes down and gives them a prediction about the Earth's going to die in 7 years and it's all your fault and I've just come to tell you and gone. Sometimes a bit of probing, who knows. In this case, no, he's gone. I thought, on its own, it's useless. It's just nothing. It's just another one of millions of recorded sightings. And then I found later other books on mysticism, etc. Other side of the mountain, same area. A group of young people have seen the Madonna in a tree. Oh, okay, we've seen a Madonna in the tree. Usual blue, doesn't matter. That's weird. Must be a coincidence. Yeah, that's odd. Then I got further into Bigfoot hunting. Near the same mountain, somebody sees a Bigfoot. But hang on. Can't have all three in the same area. What are the common principles? The time, the place. What is the time What is the unifying theme of the sightings? Religion, in the case of the Madonna. Hunting, in the case of a Bigfoot. New Age techno dreams, in the case of Orthon from Venus. It's starting to get a little weird. So I continued researching and reading and writing and taking notes. I had this is pre-computer age, remember, we're talking 60s. I had boxes of printer's type, without the printer's type, but the boxes. They're long and skinny things. And I'd go through my books and I'd write down the time and place and the phenomena in whatever alphabetical section it went into. Where it occurred, it went into that section. Happened in Aberdeen in Scotland, goes into A. Zanzibar, Z, whatever. Whatever geographic locale I found would go into these boxes. Those boxes eventually became computer data sheets on very primitive black and blue and green and black screens, the old CGA screens that were 4 inches by 4 inches. And really interesting to work with. Very simple computing. And it kept growing, and it must have kept growing here. Too many synchronicities to be random. And that's how we ended up with those graphs. Those sine waves, all the different sizes, they travel throughout the multiverse. I'm not just sticking to a universe, I'm saying multiverse, because the entire multiverse is created by sine waves and harmonic resonances. And I'll give you a simple little lecture as well. Not a lecture, really. I've tried to work out the mechanics of it all. Okay, we have solid. It just sits there. Subatomic structures barely doing anything, just sitting there. Okay, fine, we all know that one, or I hope we do. Liquid, yes, it's gotten excited. It has gotten excited. It's starting to move. Yeah, we know that, idiot. I'm referring to myself, of course, to the questioner. And then we got gas. Everything's flying everywhere. It's expanding. It's running. It's doing everything. Okay, they're the free states of matter. Except there are 5. Number 4 is plasma. Not blood plasma. Plasma. No. It exists in the center of a nuclear eruption or explosion. The components of the atom are at such a state their magnetic bonds have been destroyed. They are free matter, but moving at such a rate that they're beyond gas. And then something that puzzled me for years and years and years and years was, what was the 5th state?
I was just thinking that. Wait a minute, there was 5.
Yes. What was the 5th state? What is the 5th state? For many years I thought it was something called the quasar vacuum, and it probably still is. But the problem is, if you have extreme heat, you don't have any witnesses. So it doesn't matter what happens to get to it. I thought maybe it still is a quasar vacuum, but it's not. It's harmonics. Harmonic resonance. There is no mass left at all. All we have left is vibrations, which is sine waves of a multitude of sizes and lengths and ages and time periods. Because all matter really is sine waves of energy. I thought I got it. And there they are. Repetitive sine waves. Whole lots of them, big ones, little ones, roll up, roll up, roll up, all shapes, all sizes. Not all colours, because colours are a different form of frequency. They require a bit more solidity. So all of these phenomena, Virgin Marys, Bigfoot, wormholes, UFOs, can be created or destroyed or experienced when certain combinations of sine waves go past each other and change their internal harmonics for that moment. So I was looking at problems of one of the most common themes in UFO reports is heat and light. You get so many reports of people getting clear conjunctivitis from looking at UFOs. They're getting sunburned. We're talking energy source here. Heat generating, very high level energy source. Well, hang on. What is this heat? After all, we see them in the sky and they're a light. It's still a heat generating source. But what sort of heat is it when from out of it it lands in front of you and beings apparently come out of it and in some cases do very weird things with you. In other cases, do totally stupid things with you and around you. As I was discussing a few months ago, it could be as banal in the multiverse of travelling through it as two kids in mum and dad's second-hand UFO coming to Earth for a visit, pick up a cow or something, and crashing through a billboard. After all, when you're zooming through the multiverse, you might not know where your portal is opening. And there's a billboard in front of it. Or a building. Or what? More than likely, most aliens are like us. And most of their kids are like we were. Grasping, intelligent, learning, thinking, and occasionally non-thinking creatures. Relative to the civilization, apparent civilization they belong to. What's to say that when these wormholes open, we're talking about the energy that surrounds us, that this resonance opens that door, actually creates the phenomena to be seen by the observer as something they can believe in, or they will go stark, raving, mad. The brain protects them, in most cases, by creating something it can understand. It's a self-protection system. But what if coming from elsewhere is a form of matter or uncreated being travelling through this area where everything is totally loose, teleporting? What better costume or disguise could it have than being something from that person's imagination, something from that person's cultural loading, be it the Virgin Mary or a Bigfoot or a little green thing or a big black thing or what? And in some cases, do we get accidental escapees? The pterodactyls we see flying around.
Right, and I
The
think
monsters.
Yeah, I think one of the Star Trek series actually touched on that when they had a being appeared and they said, "How come we're all seeing you different?" And he said, "Because we read your mind to see what you could accept us as without going and without questioning yourself." And so it was like it's interesting that you came up with that same theory. And when you were talking about the UFO crashing into a billboard, my first thought was if I was a teenager, I'm probably used to being able to phase through. And so I'm not thinking about the billboard being a solid object. I'm like, yeah, I can just phase through. And it's
Bang.
like, hey, this isn't phasing with me. Oops.
Yes. That's it. Everything needs to become normal. So, yes, I am radical. I'm not conservative. A lot of people don't like my concepts. But as people have said over the years, my concepts are generally 30 to 50 years ahead of most people. I was writing about the ninth planet in the 70s when everyone said, no, it didn't exist. There was nothing in the Oort cloud apart from random planetoids. That was already postulating its existence. That a lot of these phenomena come through different dimensions that are also on Earth. We don't need answers that are only one answer. We have a multitude of questions, so you can have a multitude of answers. We can have Bigfoots living here, or big feet. I've had arguments with people over that. We can have big feet, Bigfoots, Bigfoot, whatever. Semantics. Living in our forests and places. And they're natives to here. But who's to say we don't have Bigfoot from that aren't really Bigfoot, that are camouflaged for travelling here because they're a great disguise system. You can have Bigfoot wandering around, looking around, seeing what's going on, and apparently not dying or leaving bones anywhere, but oh, well, it's a minor technicality. Can't find elephant bones either, so they're not unreal. You observe this thing in the woods and you come running down and say, there's a Bigfoot in the woods. I just saw him. He was over near the tree. And the usual response you will get will be, you've really got to stop drinking, Clem. Too much moonshine. Just piss off. Because a fantastic disguise is the most unbelievable disguise. Because people will say, that doesn't exist. Can't be that. Can't be this. And you start amassing thousands of them. You see that series of red books behind me?
Yes.
22 volumes, 7,000 pages, 1600 to 1999. Strange phenomena including Bigfoot, UFOs, Virgin Marys in trees, lake monsters, sea monsters, flying big birds as I call them, not the yellow thing from Sesame Street, and lots and lots and lots of others. It's the largest encyclopedia on strange phenomena ever written. I wrote it earlier this year, along with, I think I wrote another 8 books. And I'm doing a big series. I like to stop and write a different book just to sort of freshen up. And I was still working full time when I was doing that. It's a lot of data.
It is, and I'm curious with understanding how you're saying everything is sine wave and everything is, perfect union, can open up your perception to things. Do you think that's what happened in, I believe it's, if I remember right, the Minoan temples on Crete, where they have like Stegosaurus etched in stone?
Now, there's
And
a Cambodian temple that's apparently got a Stegosaurus etched into stone on a right-hand pillar. I haven't seen a Cretan one, but I've seen photos of a Cambodian one. It's a lovely Stegosaurus because you can tell by the beautiful ridged plates on the back.
yeah, and I think they had other dinosaurs too, and they were like just little images surrounding this doorway. And I'm wondering because we always say, how did they know what they looked like without ever seeing one? Could it be that when they were carving, the people who were carving it happened to see one of these what I would call windows, like you were describing, where the sine waves were in conjunction at the right time,
in the right
and
place.
they saw the past.
I
Or
wouldn't doubt it. I'm sure that would happen because we're in a multiverse. When you look at the menagerie that's been reported, like as you said, when we think of lake monsters and sea monsters, we immediately think of,
the Loch Ness.
yes, Nessie, a plesiosaur. They always call it, well, not always, but always call it a plesiosaur. Big body, big flippers, long neck, little head. Where did they get the idea it was a plesiosaur? And that's worldwide. You look at Champ in Lake Champlain, the Ogopogo in Lake Okanagan. I've written books on lake monsters, so I remember some of them. And the ones that were in the centre of the Atlantic wandering around. Funny thing is, though, yes, we get this vision. The Nessie, the plesiosaur. 1888, I think. Loch Ness. I think there were 12 sightings of Nessie. Long before the accepted start of the Loch Ness myth is 1932 or 1933, where the doctors report, excuse me, there's a stone sculpture with a picture of Nessie sitting on it on the shore of Loch Ness, dating from the pre-medieval period. So we're not too sure about the later explanation. But oddly enough, in this 1 year, with a quite high number of sightings, it was described as an amphibian. A diver described it as a giant frog. And other monsters of the deep. We didn't have one plesiosaur. And yet, other times, plesiosaur. I should get a hand puppet. Plesiosaur. Are we misidentifying, in some cases, actual creatures? And our brain is still camouflaging them into what we want.
I would have to think so at sometimes, because it would explain too why you can have 30 people standing on the shore looking at the same thing, and only three say, okay, there's, like you're saying, Nessie, and everybody else is looking and going, I see a tree limb. Where are you seeing Nessie?
Yeah. That often happens in UFO sightings, where you get a multitude of people looking at something in the sky, and you've also got some of them that don't see anything. One of the most famous photographs of a UFO sighting, and due to BVM or Virgin Mary and Tree, and that's VBM, isn't it? VMT? Anyway, the Virgin Mary and Tree people are not going to be happy. There's this fantastic photo from the Miracle of Fatima in Portugal, 1914, October, if I recall. All the eyes are staring into the sky, and you can see light casting down on them, strong light casting down on them. And there are early cine cameras looking up as well at the same time. But this is supposed to be a Blessed Virgin Mary event with three little shepherd people, or
Right.
children really.
The
And yet
three girls, yeah.
the sun came from the sky and danced in front of the people to show the magnificence of God. Was it also waiting for Mary to beam up and then go? And it's still an existing photograph.
Yeah, and it's still a topic that, like, the Vatican keeps the accounts of locked up.
Yes, it's a bit like the Smithsonian with giant remains.
Yeah.
Either locks it up or burns it. Because there are a lot of paradigms, cultures and religions want to protect and want to keep, or they lose their power. But my viewpoint is knowledge is more than power. Knowledge is everything. We must do our best to promote it, gather it, and keep it. What I love about my books, as I said, over 128, probably more. I don't count them very often because they keep growing. One day, the computer systems will have carked it, to use an Australian term, which means they're gone, they're dead, they're stuffed. And whatever superseded them, it's probably gone, and there's a blackout going on. But in 100 years' time, there'll be some of my books sitting in thrift shops, maybe a few in libraries. That knowledge will be continuing.
I challenge you to even say it could be a textbook.
A lot of people like my books because I don't, as I said, I don't write for intellectuals. I find most of them wankers. I'm not going to spend my life. Somebody said, why don't you just choose a subject and work on it academically? This was many, many years ago. I said, what? I can write an article on fish hooks on the island of Maria, or the west side of the island, I should say, Maria in the Pacific, and write the definitive work on it, the history, the construction, how the patterning came to Maria. The only person interested in that book, though it would give me tenure at a university for years, is the other silly old bastard on the other side of the island who's stating that the fish hooks are slightly different. I'm not sure how much that helps knowledge in a macro way.
No.
Because you only see patterns in macro form. You can't see them in micro form. One has to gather data, compare it, analyze it, see the trends, see the themes. It's all patterning.
And talking about patterning, I've noticed like pyramid complexes all over the world are on ley lines that cross. And other hotspots of activity are where ley lines are crossing. Do you think that the ley lines of the planet are affecting these sine waves, and that's why they're more prevalent and crossing in certain areas than not just anywhere?
No, I think the opposite. The ley lines were where the harmonic paths were. But the harmonic paths keep moving. I got into great trouble for Geodetic Society in Australia. No, they're fixed, they're fixed, they're fixed. I said, well, why aren't they doing anything? They did something here. Excuse me. Why aren't they still active? The Maya and the early Central American cultures moved their main temples or rededicated a new temple on a different site every 56 years because they believed the energy lines were moving. They also dedicated it because it was also the time of the parallax of Venus. I think it's a parallax of Venus. I jam too much in here and I forget at times. It's to do with the perihelion of Venus. Anyway, Venus was said to be the destroyer that came every 56 years to Earth to wipe it out. And so every 56 years they would dedicate new temples, sacrifice thousands of people in a traditional rip out the heart, chuck them down the stairs, put the skull in the rack. Which people are, oh, horrified, that's horrible, horrible. We cannot look at it through that culture's eyes. We looked at it differently, but the subjective part was they moved things. They stated that these energy areas move. Like I said to people, you can sit in the main tomb of if it's a tomb, in the middle of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and what are you going to find? You're going to find yourself bored shitless. Because nothing is happening. It has not reached another time again. Another grid of coordinates that are moving down to it. These patterns don't repeat every second Wednesday. Well, they might in some places, it'll be for microseconds. They repeat in periodic cycles. Then they move slightly. Yes, the temples were built, but usually on the site of older temples or older sacred sites, and then the Christians came along and built theirs on top of there, instead of looking at the fact that maybe the energy is moving. The geomagnetics of the Earth, which or the geomagnetics of the universe, is all moving, because this again, when you look at a planetary scale and refer back to what I said about the periodicities of the major planets, every planet is a massive magneto. It's got a molten metal core, and it's revolving and generating its own frequency of electromagnetic charge. The sun does the same. Every planetoid does the same. So we're looking at a pinball of different frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies occurring, and then micro frequencies to go with it. Research in schizophrenia. Bless you. Research in schizophrenia. You're salting the dogs on me. Yes, not the first time. Research on schizophrenia shows electromagnetism in a lot of cases causes of visions and sounds.
Now he goes outside.
That's right, my cat usually sits behind me. Some cases he's come up on the desk, but, well, she, I should say, but she's asleep at the moment somewhere. No, she's not even there. She's in one of our other beds. So we have this energy multiverse, as you say, the energy that surrounds us, constantly moving. Yes, the ley lines might have been on spots where activity was, but no, they're basically gone now. And I've got lots of books on ley lines. I've studied them for years, the work of Watkins and the old, what was it, the old Grey Trench or something like that, his first book, which is buried in there somewhere, along with a lot of... When I do my research, I like to buy the copy of the original author. I like to feel it, I like to sniff it, I like to read it. Because I know if that person put their cojones on the line and wrote this book, they wrote this theory, they wrote these arguments. That takes a lot of guts, a lot of perseverance. So I appreciate that. Then I see what's in it, what I can use, what I can observe. So I have to set parameters of what do I keep and what do I turf. And those parameters can change as well. But as I said, these books aren't written for intellectuals. None of mine are. So they can be very long and sometimes very tedious. Only the really big ones, though. Most people enjoy the little ones because, as we said before, they're travel guides. You know, you can find where it is or where it occurred or where it was seen. Because people have to get involved. That's how you spread knowledge. Before it all gets swept aside by the powers that be or the religions that be. You know, we have a very important role in preserving, finding, and redistributing knowledge.
Right. And part of that, too, I think is interesting is thanks to shows like Ancient Aliens, where they show us, like, I think it's Pumakuku, I think is how you pronounce it, where
Pumapunku near Tiwanaku on the Altiplano, Bolivia. Yes.
they have all those blocks that are perfectly cemented together without cement, laser cut in a way that every person I've talked to that's in that field says we have zero capabilities of making that happen. And so it's like, we need to, like you're saying, before it disappears, because, the powers that be are making everything disappear, share that information is out there. And I was surprised to learn that there's even a spot where they have a wall that goes like this and has a bend in it where the rock was bent. Solid rock. I was like, how do you do that?
Lots of theories about the rocks. I get into arguments about rocks. Like people go on, what about the Great Pyramid? And I say, so what about the Great Pyramid? No, you can't have that regard about the Great Pyramid. I said, the average rocks of 2.5 tons. Okay, that's a reasonable sized car. Yes, well, and you got a pyramid. Pyramids are universal because they're easy to build. They don't fall over. They're shaped like that, so they don't fall over. And you just keep adding bits till you get to the top. Herodotus mentioned a thing like a kangaroo crane moving the rocks. I mentioned years ago that there were canals leading to the bases of the pyramids. We know what the quarries are, but it's only a 2.5 ton rock in most cases. Look at how the Egyptians moved their obelisks. Obelisks are hundreds of tons, and they're big, and they're actually brittle. There's still some dead ones sitting in quarries near Aswan in Egypt. They floated them upriver, and they erected them. But how did they do that? They say, well, next time you're in the centre of New York or Sydney or London, go and see Cleopatra's Needle. They're called Cleopatra's Needle in every major city because they were taken from Egypt and taken to the major cities, and it wasn't aliens building them. It was us. We re-erected them. We put them in the centre of parks and intersections. They all came from Egypt. If you want to talk about big rocks, okay, big rocks I love. Think of Baalbek in Lebanon. Baalbek was an out-of-the-way, non-trade route site in southern Lebanon. Southern Lebanon? Yes. In the Bekaa Valley. It became the site of the largest Roman temple in the world, the Temple of Jupiter. Its columns were 20 metres high each, on top of a massive base, a big rectangular base that was about 20 metres high again. Some blocks up to 1,000 tonnes in it, in the actual base, and in the quarry a couple of miles from Baalbek. We have such things as a stone. How can we really call it a stone? We have a rectangular carved rock, still with its spine underneath it. If you don't know primitive rock carving, the spine is the last thing to be cut. It's what joins it to the earth. This is the Hajara Hubla, the star of a pregnant woman. She weighs 1,600 tons. She's pre-Roman. No one knows how old she is, and in the last 10 years, we've found 3 other stones of the same size buried next to her. They were obviously intended. Actually, go to Google. Go to Baalbek. Look up Hajar al-Hubla, Hajar, Al-A-L, Hubla, Hubla, and you'll see the biggest slab of rock you've ever seen in your life. Forget the pyramids. This took technology, and a technology we have no idea about. The legends of Baalbek, as it's named after the god Baal, the lord of the sky, the lord of earthquakes. The Lord who came to Baalbek, landed at Baalbek, and took off in flames. Sound like somebody we know. Some technology we know. These are the mysteries. These are the archaeological mysteries I love. Because they are truly unexplainable. No one knows how these mega rocks were moved. And there are lots of pickies of them on the internet. And that's just one thing. We really have an amazing world around us. Wake up, Michael.
Oh, I'm awake. I'm fascinated by this, and I'm also starting to think about we have all these megalithic structures around the world that we're starting to rediscover, or we're starting to discover were there, but were destroyed. And so I'm wondering if there's a reason why the powers that be would go in and knowingly destroy a monolithic structure. What
It
were they afraid
shows
of?
it shows a previous politics, a previous religion that it wants to overcome. Next time you look at the ley lines of England, yes, they connected Paleolithic sites and Stone Age sites. We know that. Well documented. But you're damn sure you will find a church plonked on it. Because they're taking the power from the old site and the power to control the people from the old site. It's like when the Christian church introduced the new religious calendar and brought in Christmas. Unfortunately, in the Northern Hemisphere, baby lambs aren't around in the middle of winter. So we're not quite sure what the shepherds were doing in the paddocks at that time of year. But that time of year was the feast of Saturnalia. It was a time of gift giving in the Greco-Roman world, where slaves would dress up as masters, masters would dress up as slaves. It was a major religious holiday. So they made it Christmas, the Mass of Christ. Easter, that's an easy one. Easter, yeah, wonderful, wonderful. That goes back to the Paleolithic period. It's a festival of Ostara. It's a festival of Venus. It's a festival of fertility because it's the beginning of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. It's the first full moon of Aries, if you want to look at it astrologically. Because all the old calendars were lunar. So watch out for the ages of giants at 387 years. They might have been using a lunar calendar, not a solar calendar. Because as I said, most old calendars are lunar. And modern calendars in some cultures are still lunar. And I just managed to lose myself where I was, which is not unusual. So we've gone from Baalbek, a big block, to lunar calendars. Now, where was I?
Uh, well, I kind of was following you, and I wasn't, and following you, I was starting to question. Another question came to mind, like you're saying, the lunar to the solar calendar. How we had an existing calendar of time, and then switched to the Julian calendar, or the Julian to the Gregorian calendar.
The Julian to the Gregorian. Mr. Julian
And
left gaps of 5 days every 4 years, which stuffed up the seasons because their calendar kept moving. Originally, calendars, like the solar calendars of Stonehenge and other sacred sites, showed when to plant, when to reap, when to fallow. I think with the Egyptians it was arising at a Pleiades constellation was the time you sowed everything, and the setting of the Pleiades when you reaped it.
right, and there was
It's all a cosmological clock. Time, the measurement of time is a measurement of movement. There's no other reason to have it. Because without movement, there's no time. It doesn't exist. It shows in a regular manner that, yes, we can do this. But if a calendar is getting out of kilter by 5 days, well, forget it. You end up with summer theoretically in the middle of winter. Because the calendar's telling you it is.
Right. And there was originally 13 months, which I'm curious why, the significance of 13. And then the reason our months are all out of order in terms
Is
is because
because
when the Gregorians took it over and eliminated a month, that they rearranged the names, and that's where we are today. And that's why that doesn't make sense, some of the names.
they didn't want the lunar calendar to be recognized as a lunar calendar because it belonged to older religions. The Hebrew calendar is lunar. If you look at the progression of the main feast days, they're always different. The Islamic calendar is lunar. The Christians decided they want a tidier version without the moon in it. Lunar calendar is great. That's 28 days a month, 13 of them. I think you get 1 day increment every couple of years. But no, Mother Church didn't want it. So we've ended up with this rather messy Gregorian thing, because it's actually 365 and a quarter days, and the Mayor had worked it out 2,000 years ago. It was actually, I think, 4.3261, but don't quote me on that one. They were really good with mathematics. They were amazing. They invented the concept of zero 2,000 years ago, but why would they invent a mathematical concept of zero? That's used in binary mathematics.
That's a good point. And as far as we know, there was no binary
No,
language back then.
no, and yet they say some languages seem like. I was reading an article in an obscure book a few years ago. I don't have it. I had a copy of it and it sort of disappeared or went or got buried or something. And it said that the early language of Tiwanaku, prior to the Wari or Hawari people living there, who are mainly mentioned as the builders of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku and other cities in the area. And it's a high-swept desert. Their language is binary. Why? Is it a vestige from times past when the gods appeared at Titicaca, when Pumapunku was destroyed? Even the Incas state that their first gods, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, if I remember rightly, appeared from the island of the sun when the sun came down to earth in Titicaca. They needed subjects. Here we are. It's like Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan and I think it's Vukubka and a lot of the Central and South American gods. Yes, Quetzalcoatl is the feathered serpent that came from the sky. But in the oldest legends, the feathered serpent that came from the sky and destroyed the sacred land, the motherland of Atlan. Can't even name Atlan. It sounds like Atlantis. It sounds like Aztlan. It sounds like Atala. I read books on this years in the 80s on similarities of names used by ancient cultures. And then I find, where are we? Oh, there you are. Ah, hello. Meet my friend Sekhmet. I'll bring her closer. This is Sekhmet. Hello, everybody. Why would I bother with Sekhmet? She's Egyptian. She's probably 4,000 years old. She's limestone. I've had her for years. Sekhmet is called the Great Destroyer, the lion-headed goddess with the burning mane. What? Who destroyed the land of Araloo in the Western Sea, the Atlantic. Funny, that ties in with the Central and South American legends. And what better description of a comet do you have? Something soaring through the sky with a burning mane and destroying an island. And this is universal mythology. This isn't just one country. This isn't one tribe in North Africa or Morocco or one little group in Colombia, Mexico or Peru. This is lots of them. Lots of interesting mysteries. I wrote a book, I've got several books, on the last great cataclysm of 9 to 10,000 BC, which people screamed at years ago, said, no, it never occurred. And I'm pretty fussy with my research. Remember a year ago, a couple of people started writing that a comet had hit the Earth between 10 and 8,000 years. They put, it's drawing a bit of a long bow. I keep it down to a smaller period. And it was one comet. I thought, whoopee-doo. One comet. I've got lots of comets in my books occurring at different times. And in the period of 12 to 10,000 years ago, swarms of them hitting the Earth. I suppose someday somebody will recognise that fact in 20 years' time. But now, okay, it's one comet. And I wrote about them in the 1970s in a book called Goodbye Siberian Woolly Mammoth, which is another one of my favourite subjects. Yeah, I do write on a multitude of sins and a multitude of things and mysteries such as giant hairy relatives of the Indian elephant do not eat snow. And if snow's the only thing available, they would die. But woolly mammoths have prehensile lips for eating leaves off trees. In a tundra, you don't have trees. You've got willows that grow to about 4 inches. And when we found remains and still find the remains of a woolly mammoth and the woolly everything else that used to live up there, woolly rhinoceros, mastodons, they're caught up in a mass of mud and dirt and broken tree limbs. Funny, we're supposed to be on a savanna, on a tundra, and mud. And they're disarticulated in most cases, as if a massive mudslide came along like a razor blade and cleaned the top of the earth. All I get this all from different books on geology and geography and anthropology, and nothing amazing, but no one bothers to collate them all together. We have amazing events happening on this planet over the vast bulk of time. I wrote a history of comet and meteor impacts on the Earth. It's only 700 pages from the beginning. I wrote that an interesting discovery I made, this is years ago I wrote this thing. Just collating data, as always, from all the recognised sources. I was looking at a site called Barberton in South Africa, in the centre of the Greenstone Belt. 3,260 million BC, if I remember rightly. Don't quote me on it. I've got too much to remember and I'm getting old. I'm nearly 70. And what I like to do with some of the accounts, some of the books, is I like to flesh them out. What is this area like? In this case, a meteor hit it and there was a 60-mile crater which meant nuclear winter, universal devastation on Earth. Fortunately, there's no oxygen, there's nothing living here in that period. Earth was still anaerobic. Okay, big comet. It was the second biggest one found up until that time. As I said, I wrote about 700 pages of them, in chronological order, of course. As I do, people get to recognise my books. And I was fleshing it out, and I thought, this is interesting. The oldest evidence of fossil bacteria found so far was found at Barberton in South Africa. Oh, wow, that's the same place. They date to 3,260 million years ago. Same place, same date. Meet our ancestors. The bacterium, the anaerobic bacterium that arrived at Barberton. Because the good thing about comets is they're mud balls. I know we don't like calling them mud balls, but they're mud balls. They're big balls of dirt and mud. And the most beautiful thing about them is that if you're inside it, you're protected from solar radiation. It's nice and warm, perfectly warm for a bacterium. And you can travel the multiverse in it. You've got water. You've got things to eat. You can see the universe.
Right, and there are people that even will lay in the dirt to heal wounds, and so you got even that to where.
Uh, the world truly is an amazing place, and so is the multiverse. Man, I'm used to people not believing what I write. I get into a lot of crap with established groups of people who say, you can't write like this, you can't research that, you can't publish this. Excuse me, I'll publish what I bloody want. Because I generally find that I'm right.
So I'm kind of curious your take on Pangea. Were we one massive landmass and we split apart and we're still floating apart? Or do you think we're actually still the one original mass, but the waters rose from, say, the glaciers melting, that and that's why the land is like Hawaii is still growing, is the land is rising up above the water level, and so that's why we think we're moving but we're not moving? Or do you really think we are moving, in which case will we all collide again into one large landmass?
Continental drifting it's just standard geology. We can see where bits fitted inside each other originally. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle. Then they started drifting. Then the odd comet would hit them. And most of the water we have on our planet was brought by comets. Because in that mud is water. And these comets were enormous, and they brought water to Earth. Because when Earth was formed, there's no water. There's nothing that could create water. Water had to arrive like life. Eventually, we started having seas around Pangaea, or Pangaea, and as the surface of the Earth kept trembling and moving, because it's a living thing, it's an energy mass, they moved. As different colossal impacts occurred to it, other things moved. Other parts of Pangaea broke up and moved. We also have the mass impact apparently that created the moon. Established science still believes we had an impact with the Earth in the early days when we were still hot and bubbling, basically. And that impact liberated a vast mass of Earth, dirt, from the Pacific Ocean region, or where it would be now, and cast it into space to become the moon. Other people disagree. I've read books that the moon is actually a large satellite. It's been brought into our orbit to watch us. So you've got to watch out what's happening on the dark side. But it can't watch us from the dark side. It has to be on this side. So I sometimes think it weird that why would you put your watching space on the opposite side? But maybe I'm too simple and can't work out their concepts yet. Yeah, Pangaea is just geology. And yet, when it was brought up, continental drift, in the 1930s, oh, talk about howling down. There's lots of howling. He was regarded as a complete idiot. Funny, we've got it now. When Alvarez brought up the concept of one meteor or comet hitting Central America and creating the Chicxulub crater, he was held down, and he was one of the most renowned physicists on Earth who had worked on the plutonium bomb in the 1940s and early 50s. I mean, this guy is or was a genius. I don't know if he's fallen off the perch or not now, but he'd be getting very long in the tooth. And he proposed a comet or meteor hit the area of Chicxulub in the Yucatan, left a crater 60 miles wide, and caused a volcanic or cosmic winter that wiped out the dinosaurs. Apparently wiped out the dinosaurs, because we have mentioned people reporting seeing some. But that's the accepted theory. A few years ago, I wrote a book on the extinction of the dinosaurs, because when I was looking and studying my history of meteoric and cometary impacts, I discovered that sometimes they ran in rows, several in a row. Other times, you'd have the big eruption, the big impact first, and then the fragments travelling across the face of the Earth, like teardrops. Last few years, wow, we got geographical lines of comet and meteor impacts. Gee, I read about that years ago. We have teardrops, they're called now. Yeah, well, the same thing. For Chicxulub, they look at tiny little Chicxulub. They don't look at the Cuba crater that's 500 miles across next to it. They don't look at the Shiva crater in the Indian Ocean on the east coast of Africa that's about 1,000 miles across. They don't look at the fact that when you run a curve from Shiva through Cuba to Chicxulub, it's a long teardrop. First impact, larger pieces, smaller pieces, and allowing for, and the geologists hate me for it, which is all right, I don't like them either. I worked out, I did the average of when they recorded events to be. Remember, when they wrote down that this erupted here or this struck here, they would have anything from 50 million to 500 million year error factors. I wish I could do that, but I can't. But I found when you worked out the average of the error factor, you suddenly had these lines of impact. You suddenly have these teardrops of impact. And in this case, you have several impacts at the same time that wiped out the dinosaurs. We'll see what happens next.
So I'm kind of curious, talking about like impacts. Could it have been a meteor strike bringing water, or do you think it was glacier
Cometary strike.
melting that caused
Glaci-
the flood, the Great Flood, in the stories?
Glaciers came later,
Okay.
much later. As well, had to have water first. You need oxygen first before you have water. Oxygen, water, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen together. Most of the water has arrived. You have periods of cryogenic Earth where the entire Earth is covered in ice. It's a big ice ball. And people often wondered, how did the ice start retreating? Because technically it gets colder and colder. It will continue getting colder and stay that way in space. There's no insulation, remember. But I showed in my, when the sky crashed down, that's it, that climatic ages, glacial ages, extinction events were caused by comets or meteors. So bang, cracks the ice, creates a new earth tilt, of which we've had 271 so far known. New seasons start approaching. Glaciers? Look at North America in the last glacial period. Glacial period started pretty cool 250, 300 million years ago, apparently. Glacial periods are more common than warm periods. At the end of the last glacial period, which peaked by 15,000 BC, it was starting to retreat by appeared to be retreating 13,000, then 10,990 BC, where bang, 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 bang. Huge meteor and cometary impacts hitting the Earth that wiped out all the giant megafauna of North America, or almost all of it. There are reports of mammoths still being seen 4,000 years ago. Maybe there's still one wandering around Canada, we're not sure. But we have streams of events happening. The ice mass over North America was 2 miles thick. At that time, Hudson Bay was the North Pole, which with the impacts coming from this direction, shifted everything 27.5 degrees, so that the North Pole ended up near Greenland. And in that time, all the mammoths and everybody who was in the temperate regions here on the side of the earth went, they're snap frozen like Edgel's peas. That's why they've still got buttercups and flowers sticking out of their mouths. Why they've still got the same thing and leaves from oak trees and lime trees in their bellies, because their actual space moved 27.5 degrees. And these impact events, one of which hit Hudson Bay, and if you look at the east shore of Hudson Bay, it's a beautiful half circle. You start looking at different areas, you start realizing these are meteorite hits. These are cometary hits. And at the same time, that half circle was formed that crashed through the 2 mile thick ice mass covering the top of North America and Canada. Or should I say United States and Canada. Ice fragments started flaring out and crashing out from the eruption and hit the Carolinas, Georgia, Virginia, north of Florida, parts of Wisconsin, part of Wyoming, out west, in a large arc based on Hudson Bay. And these craters are elliptical. The northern or northwestern ones, depending on where you're looking at it from, but the top ones have virtually no lip. The lip is at the bottom because the projectiles that came crashing down came in at low angles, scooted out the soil, scooped it out, and created the embankment on the opposite side. These were ice masses from the Great Explosion. Then, these ice masses have crashed everywhere in a circle around Hudson Bay. The great 2 mile thick ice mass is collapsing via the St. Lawrence River, via I can't remember the name of the bloody river that runs into the ocean in between Washington and Oregon. Mississippi we've already done. We've done the St. Lawrence. The Columbia River, I think it's the Columbia River.
Columbia or Colorado?
This is the one between Washington and Oregon. Not the Cascade, but those rivers there, all this ice started running out. Well attested, geological fact, scientifically proven, in that period around 10,900 BC, world sea levels rose by 300 feet. That's a great flood. All of
That
our
is a
major
great flood.
cities are port cities. Gone. Most of the areas of vast masses of population live. Continental shelves. Gone. 300 feet. 100 meters. Some say 400 feet. That amount of water released by meteoric strikes. But it's an accepted fact. For some strange reason, the water filled the earth. The only way water goes up and down on earth generally is if glaciers start being created, sea levels go down because the water and ice is going into the glacier. If sea levels are going up, it means the glaciers are going down. That's when the warm periods occur. This was the start of a warm period, the present one we're in. So the odds are we're getting a cold period coming along. This warm period is just pretty well normal. But I won't say much more than this warm period is being manipulated by politicians and others who wish to make a lot of money and power out of it.
Right, the weather wars. But it also, what you're saying, kind of makes sense of when I went on a trip into Alaska. I mean, when we look and think of Alaska, we think of the land of kind of like Iceland, ice and snow, which I say Iceland because of its name, but it's really Greenland. That's the land of ice and snow.
Well, it wasn't either, but we'll continue.
Right. But that there's a rainforest in Alaska, which totally blew my mind when I was there because we're always think of rainforest in the hot areas like Costa Rica. And so it was like, how do we have a rainforest in a land that's surrounded by snow and ice?
We've got the same in Tasmania. Cold climate rainforests. And also, Alaska was never covered by glaciers in the Ice Age. It was on the rim. And as for the story of people coming over via the Bering Strait 13,000 years ago, excuse me, they waited till 13,000 years ago to cross the Bering Strait, which was a wilderness. It was then called Beringia. It was above sea level. If you're sensible, you cross the Aleutians. Seawater's down 300 to 400 feet. Well, actually, yes, down from now. So you got huge land masses crossing the Pacific from Japan and East Asia. It's all different ways. You got less sea. People can come from anywhere. The latest theories are that Magdalenian people from Europe and North America went to South America, to Brazil, because it wasn't that far. It's different when there's no sea or very little.
Right. And
You know,
I mean, we even have coins from the Phoenicians of the Mississippi Valley. So
oh, lots. I,
how did they know?
I read, I'm going to have a book called, and I love it, it's one of my favourites. It was a hard book to write. It's called Pre-Columbian River Explorers of North America. Yes, it hasn't got counties in it, it's got rivers and lakes. Because the ancients used rivers, lakes and seas as highways. Too expensive to move freight overland when you haven't got much to move it on. But you got a big enough raft, you can move a lot of crap and a lot of trade goods. Interesting fact. What I did was I started northeast coast of Canada, went to the major river areas where we had found remains of Viking, Roman, Celtic, Phoenician, Judaic, and others visiting North America, and followed up to the final find at the top of that river or creek that was joined to it and back again. And we continued along, and then we went up again and continued along. And the Mississippi, people don't realize, or maybe it just had been brought to their notice, in the Middle Ages, in the Roman period, which were both warm periods, you could sail through the Great Lakes to just above Chicago, where you've got only a few miles, nothing at all, and you get to the Des Plaines River. Des Plaines River goes to the Illinois River. Illinois River goes to the Mississippi River.
Right.
You could take your ship from the Gulf of Mexico to the Atlantic Ocean and vice versa. Interesting thing. I love archaeology. It's my favourite subject. The copper mining that occurred in Michigan and Isla Real and Presque Isle in Lake Michigan and in the Great Lakes, the biggest copper mining centres on Earth, where the best grade copper was found, mined in industrial quantities. Everyone downed tools around 1500 BC. This is North America. Down tools, gone. Tools are still there. Picks, shovels, ingots, raw copper. Do you know an interesting thing about 1500 BC, Michael?
Oh, like you, I've studied a lot of history, and I'm like trying to narrow down what one thing you'll be pointing out because I'm like, there's so many things that were happening.
It was the end of the Bronze Age in Europe. Bronze is created with copper and tin, sometimes with zinc, to harden it a bit better. The Iron Age started. There was no reason for the Phoenicians and Minoans and the others who sailed the Atlantic to go and get the copper from North America, because there was not enough copper at Great Orme Cave in Cornwall. I think it was Sinma in Israel, or some of the mines in southern Turkey, to supply the amount of copper needed for the Bronze Age, because everything was made out of bronze. It all came from North America. Both things stopped at the same time on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Supply and demand.
Yeah, and I love that you point that out because a large debate between the UK and the US, like especially in the paranormal field, is they feel the UK has much more history to it because it's been documented and going back in time. But I love how you're pointing out that America was just as old historically as UK. It's just we've not been allowed or for some reason don't share that yes, we were mining copper and we had
Building
civilization
cities,
here.
mining copper, trading with ships. I'll give you a little story. You know of Louis Leakey, the great anthropologist and paleontologist?
Yes.
Okay. His discoveries in the Rift Valley, the Great Rift Valley in Kenya, basically created paleontology. He found what are now termed as eoliths, little microchipping tools. His wife found Lucy on the first Australopithecines. They found the remains of people in the Rift Valley, and that rewrote the textbooks. The different ages of hominoid and humanoid evolution. And we shall all lay praise upon the great Lukey. and I don't disparage his work at all. He went to Calico in California late in his career. He was already an older man by then. So he knew everything about everything to do with paleontology. And he looked at an excavation at Calico in California and another one I can't remember the name of in Texas. They're in my books. He said these are eoliths from 250,000 years ago. And the American scientific and paleontological establishment that still pushes the story that North America was first colonized in 13,000 BC put their hands up in horror and shrieked and said, "You're mad, you fool, you don't know what you're talking about." And this was the world's greatest paleontologist. That's story one. Story two. In Europe, you mentioned earlier in the program, we got cromlechs, we got menhirs, all over the place. And what do we call them? Cromlechs and menhirs and dolmens. But when we find them in North America, and there are lots of them, especially on the east coast, do you know what we call them? Glacial erratics. Excuse me. They're all dolmens, menhirs and cromlechs in Europe and North of Africa and England and Scotland and Wales. You get to North America and the east coast, they're called glacial erratics. There's a beautiful example of one just outside of the old fire station at New Salem, I think, in New York State. Been very well visualized over the years and recorded. And it's a gigantic rock sitting on top of three little rocks, and they're perfectly triangular mathematically, as are a lot of the dolmens on the eastern side of the Atlantic Ocean. But the theory is with glacial erratics is when the glaciers came rolling down and the glaciers swept the ground like razor blades, which they did in a lot of cases. How the hell didn't they get rid of the three rocks underneath when the big rock landed on them?
Right.
Excuse me? How do you explain at Hueyatlico in Puebla State, south of Mexico City, we have mammoth remains? And a little hunting note, all you hunters that have been trying to get Bigfoot after squirrel shooting when you were young, you can only throw a spear into a live animal bone for it to penetrate. Remember that. Live bone only. Mammoth bones is Hueyatlico, 250,000 years old, with stone spearheads inside them. Modern science says, no, wrong, misdated, forget it. Okay, well, you find later mammoths for me, which we can shoot spears into. Then it's end of subject, we're not interested. America is littered with magnificent ruins, and one of my pet hates, one of my pet peeves, one of the things that really pisses me off immensely is the term mound builder. I hate the term mound builder. These groups of people were different cultures. They built pyramids out of earth. The same as in Peru in a lot of cases. Same as using adobe. They don't call them mounds in Peru. They call them pyramids. Pyramids 5,000 years old. They're called pyramids. North America, dirt, mud, primitive. You call Cahokia primitive. Cahokia, a city of 100,000 people in pre-colonial times, opposite where St. Louis is in Missouri. A city with the biggest pyramid in North America, a double truncated pyramid with a bigger base area than the Great Pyramid of Cheops. That's not a mud pile. That is not a mound. That is a pyramid. I prefer to call them the North American pyramid builders. They built roads. They built cities. They built amazing, geometrical structures, and lots of mounds, I must say, little pyramids, little tombs, oddly enough, at times with giants in them. A lot of times just ordinary people surrounded by wonderful things to be levelled by farmers and ploughs, to be destroyed by archaeologists and treasure hunters. We lose the continuity of a site if everyone takes everything. We lose history.
And it's interesting you bring up Cahokia because I've been there 3 or 4
Cahokia is
times,
wonderful.
and there's an energy there that it's like unlike anything else. And I love how you're saying it's a pyramid and not a mound because
What a shitty term to call it. It's a magnificent
yeah.
piece of engineering.
And but the thing that gets me is whenever we have historical sites, what's the first thing we do? Ground penetrating radar. And say, this is what we have. We mapped out. This is how big the area is. Let's start excavating. And when we were there, we would say, who's done GPR work? Oh, we don't have any. It's too expensive to do. And I'm like, wait a minute. How are you a state national park area, no funding to do this simple, like,
It's a computer and
basic
a plane.
technique? And it's like, wait a minute. And they're like, well, we're trying to raise money to do it. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you've done it. You just don't want to share what you found.
Cahokia was a very complex city. Had a huge palisaded wall around it. It's not the only pyramid in it. There are several. But we don't know how many more were levelled. There's supposed to be some beauties on the Mississippi, on the St. Louis side. Gone. I've seen
Right.
19th century photos of them. Now they're intersections on freeways. You know, we have stone buildings and stone towers. Everyone said, no one made stone towers in North America. Excuse me?
See, and I can't help wonder if, because if we were to say to some, people, you have pyramids here, people would flock to it and it would become untouchable ground, so to speak.
Yes.
But if you say, oh, you have a mound here, people are like, so.
Yeah,
And
pile
I
of shit.
think
Who
that's why
cares?
they called them mounds, is because they knew people would not be upset if they were destroyed.
Yes, and to make sure people didn't care. But these are the major religious centres of earlier cultures. Because they wanted the myth of the great wilderness, that we can take all of this because no one owns it. In Australia, there's a legal term called terra nullius. Means the land is unowned. The British government imposed that on Australia with its rediscovery. Lots of people discovered it over the years by Captain Cook in 1770. But it meant that any existing inhabitant had no title, which means they couldn't go through the courts eventually to fight for it because there wasn't one. Very clever English legal thinking.
Yes.
And North America, they wanted the same thing. As the plagues they brought wiped out North American inhabitants, native inhabitants, they started bringing in the great myth of the wilderness. The unexplored wilderness, it's there, it's for you. Just go out there and grab it. Don't worry about them. We'll just shift them again if they survive the plagues. And the great myth of the wilderness grew, and the wilderness appeared to have grown. The established farmlands of the east coast of North America became wilderness because no one was maintaining them. They were dead in most cases. This apparent wilderness grew, and in most of it, the case wasn't wilderness 300 years ago. The wilderness grew into the great myth of the 19th century. It had time to do that. And that's controversial. A lot of people don't like that view either.
Right. And to be honest, I'd love to keep talking with you about this,
But we're
but we
running
are
out of
actually
time.
approaching 2 hours. And so, where can people find you if they want to ask you questions?
I normally don't answer them. Um, I'm too busy. I'm writing books and researching them. And then sleeping in my chair at midday, which I've discovered I'm doing. There's a joke doing around on Facebook. How do you get an old person to go to sleep? Just put them in a chair. We're fine then. Gone.
My grandfather was like that.
You will be too one day, my son. It's been great talking to you. As I said, if you hunt me down, now when you're searching Google, search it with inverted commas at the end to enclose George Mitrovic.
Okay.
Gorge space Mitrovic. That isolates for search only to that combination of words. You find lots of stuff on me. You find my books at Amazon. You can have a pleasant stroll for a few hours through them. You'll find other podcasts. I shouldn't say that, should I? On the internet and YouTube, you can look at. You
Oh,
can look at
I'm
my Facebook page. I've put stuff on there, but all my stuff's in my books. That's why I write them. So you can either read it as an ebook on your phone, or whatever you want to read it on, or if you're like me, too much glare, I'll stick to a book. I want to just sit here and read it and enjoy it.
well. Thank you, George, for coming, and thank you for being accommodating. And when we have you on again, we will make sure we make the timing right this time.
These things happen. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope everyone's learnt something. There's so much more to learn.
There is, and I'm wishing we had more time, but unfortunately, the iceberg is, as we say, we've clipped the tip, and there's so much more underneath yet. But we'll have to have you back on to continue.
That'd be lovely, thank you. Now, has anyone woken up yet? Oh, okay.
so,
Yeah.
so, from our show to you, everyone, have a blessed day, evening, afternoon. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for having me. I
Thank
look
you.
forward to talking to you again. Okay. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
There's that